Welcome, everyone. Today, our explainer is diving into a truly fascinating and honestly deeply moving perspective on human suffering and personal growth. We're drawing our insights today directly from a really powerful homily delivered by Father Joel Jamarsis. It's a message that takes our usual everyday understanding of hardship, failure, and pain and just flips it completely upside down. Okay, let's dive into this. Your brokenness is your blessing. I know, it sounds entirely contradictory at first, doesn't it? Like, no way. When our plans fall apart, or when we face these deep personal failures, we usually feel like our lives are completely ruined. But the source material frames this in such a profoundly empathetic way. Human suffering isn't presented here as some kind of divine punishment or a sign that you've been abandoned. Instead, this breaking process is actually a divine prerequisite for spiritual empowerment. It's not a destruction at all, you guys. It is a vital reconstruction.
Section 1. St. Peter's Journey, a Transformative Path.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it illustrates this concept of brokenness using a prime historical case study from the homily. You see, Peter wasn't born this perfect, infallible leader. Not even close. He was a deeply flawed fisherman who notoriously reached his absolute breaking point during the arrest of Jesus. He didn't just make a tiny mistake. He outright denied even knowing his closest mentor in his absolute darkest hour. That massive, incredibly public failure led to a profound period of weeping and bitter repentance. His pride, his self-reliance, completely shattered. But years later, he is literally named the rock and pillar of the entire church. The homily makes a crucial observation here. Peter's ego had to be entirely dismantled by his own failures. He had to face his ultimate spiritual breakdown before he could be built back up into a foundation strong enough to support millions. And this brings us to the core mechanism of this transformation. God empties us first. Because if we are full, there is simply no space for grace. Think about a cup. If your life is already overflowing to the brim with pride, absolute comfort, and relying totally on yourself, there's just no room to receive anything new. The explanator highlights this deep insight that sometimes our everyday comforts have to be actively decreased to make room for much greater blessings. You are broken down precisely to be rebuilt stronger. Moving on to Section 2, the danger of comfort, a false paradise. We all naturally desire an easy, comfortable life, right? Of course we do. But the homily introduces a fascinating scientific concept to challenge that exact desire: the famous rat utopia experiment. Researchers created what was essentially a literal paradise for mice. They had everything perfectly curated for them: individual beds in little houses, abundant, constantly replenished food and water. There were absolutely zero enemies or predators to worry about, and endless toys and space for playtime. It was an environment entirely 100% devoid of struggle or hardship. So what do you think happened in this flawless paradise? Well, the result was tragic: stagnation and death. The homily points out that within just a few months, without any challenges, stressors, or hardships to overcome, the rats just stopped reproducing. They became entirely lethargic, lost all their natural behaviors, and eventually the entire population died off. It illustrates a pretty terrifying truth. Without struggle, growth stops. Absolute, uninterrupted comfort is actually detrimental to existence itself. Connecting this biological experiment back to human spirituality, the source brings in a really powerful historical quote from the saints. "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." Just as those rats withered away in total comfort, human institutions and us as individuals actually grow deeper, far more resilient and exponentially stronger during periods of intense hardship. When things are too easy, our character remains shallow and is just too easily swept away. So the crucial point is how people are prepared for massive blessings, which brings us to Section 3, Character Before the Crown, Divine Priorities. There's a really clear comparison to make here regarding divine priorities. On one side, we have God's enduring traits: character, the cross, and challenges. On the flip side, we have temporary gifts: the crown, career, and comfort. The homily emphasizes that a crown is incredibly easy to wear. You can place it on someone's head in a matter of seconds, and guess what? It can be taken off just as fast. But character, that takes years of immense, grinding challenges to build. And ultimately, character is the only thing that actually lasts. The divine priority is always, always internal strength over external, fleeting success. And hey, this isn't just a theory. It is a remarkably consistent historical pattern. Look at how these major biblical figures were prepared through pain. Joseph, he had to be locked in chains in a dark Egyptian prison before he ever received the king's ring of power.
Moses spent 40 grueling years wandering in a harsh desert before he was even ready to lead Israel. David was hunted like an animal by King Saul long before he ever sat on the throne. And Paul, he was literally physically blinded and lost his entire societal standing before his eyes were opened to change the world. Just like Peter, every single one of them had to endure immense hardship first.
The divine pattern is undeniable. Cross before crown, death before resurrection, surrender before victory. The homily uses some incredibly vivid analogies right here to drive this home. Think about it. You have to dig through and remove a ton of dirt to find buried treasure. You have to endure this sharp, intense pain of a surgeon's scalpel to remove a burst appendix to save your life. You have to boil water to kill the bacteria. The breaking always precedes the blessing.
Section 4. Decoding pain, reframing struggles.
But how do we actually apply this grand philosophy to our daily, everyday lives? Father Goddess introduces a highly memorable, absolutely practical framework to help us reframe our everyday struggles. PAIN. It stands for Problems are Invitations to New Beginnings. Actually, I'll say that again because it's the core takeaway you really should remember from today. Problems are invitations to new beginnings. The urge here is to completely stop seeing your daily problems as punishments. Instead, view them as open doors to new graces and vital, necessary redirections. Let's ground this with some highly relatable, real-world invitations mentioned in the source material. Dealing with an angry spouse? Well, that's not just a frustrating fight to win. It's an invitation to pause, improve your own behavior, and actually strengthen the relationship. Got denied a US visa? It feels like a massive defeat at the time for sure, but it's actually a redirection to a better path, perhaps a much better opportunity waiting for you over in Japan or France. Even something as simple as a sore throat, which, fun fact, the speaker himself was experiencing during the homily, is framed not as a random annoyance, but as a direct divine cue to rest, slow down, and take a much-needed vacation. Everyday setbacks? They are just course corrections. To really cement this idea, the homily uses a brilliant, pretty funny metaphor. An outdated Nokia 3210 cannot watch YouTube. We all remember those indestructible old brick phones, right? They were fantastic for their time, but they are completely stuck in the past. If you stubbornly refuse to change, if you refuse to endure the temporary discomfort of upgrading your life and your mindset, you simply cannot receive new content, new experiences, or new blessings. You have to embrace the upgrade, even if the transition is a little painful. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. What current problem in your life is actually an invitation to a new beginning? Take a moment to really look at the struggles you are facing right now. The assignment from this source material is to shift your perspective entirely. Instead of complaining or worrying about being broken, find the courage to say thank you for the current challenge, recognizing it as the exact preparation you need to create space for your next great blessing. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I truly hope this fresh perspective helps you tackle whatever challenges come your way.